The troubled area in relation to the rest of Africa is a very small one. Even the 4.5 million Africans who live in Kenya outside the Kikuyu territory are not involved. The active terrorists are only a small proportion of the 1.5 million Kikuyu, Embu and Meru people, though because of fear, most of the Kikuyu tribe has aided them.
The underground organizers embarked on a campaign to unify the entire African population. The settlers and the colonial government gradually became aware of the oathing ceremonies, and in 1950, the government outlawed the Maumau Society, which they said was responsible for administering illegal oaths. The words Maumau meant nothing in any language in Kenya. We knew ourselves as the Kiama Jia Kutia Wiathi, the Freedom Struggle Association. Maumau was a name coined by the Europeans to discredit the movement and to confuse the waverers. There was no such thing as Maumau. It was an invention of the Europeans.
When the British refused to budge, some Kikuyu formed a secret organization. They lived off the land in the forest under Mount Kenya and called themselves a Land and Freedom Army. Waiwaturi joined them.
I
joined Maumau because of the hardship. The main problem was that our land had been taken by the white man. Then there was education. The schools we used to go to were closed down and destroyed. So we all came together into groups and took an oath. The African was your brother, but when you see a white man, you should know he is your enemy.
To the settlers and to their allies in the colonial government, the Kenya African Union and Maumau were one and the same, and Jomo Kenyatta, COW's president, was the leader of both.
Most Kikuyu were just as certain. Kenyatta, their leader, ran Maumau.
How much did Kenyatta know about the organization of Maumau?
I think he knew nothing.
At all?
At all. Kenyatta was among the older generation, so we feared that if he knew much, he may disagree with what we were thinking of doing. So it was only the younger generation which had decided that because all other means have failed, we must use violence.
He was not active in that organization, and we did not want him to be active in that one. And he did not know who were leading.
Kenyatta did not know who the leaders were?
No, and he could not say who was steering the wheel.
COW is not a fighting union that uses fists and weapons, Kenyatta told his followers. If any of you here think that force is good, I do not agree with you. Remember the old saying that he who is hit with a club returns, but he who is hit with justice never comes back. In 1952, the settlers refused to believe a word Kenyatta said. He was the symbol of everything they loathed, the focus of everything they feared. At one point, they even called for his liquidation.
It's very difficult not to conclude that Kenyatta himself was the originator of it.
I was completely convinced that he was the actual leader of the Maumau, that he'd started the whole thing, that he was responsible for inventing the oaths that they had to take. I have no doubt that he instituted Maumau and kept it going.
I'm quite sure, yes, that he was responsible to start with. I knew perfectly well that headmen were being murdered and their huts set on fire with them locked inside and so on.
He seemed to have a synthesis of modernism and atavism. He seemed to be totally attuned to the background of his people, to their practices, their customs, their superstitions. He knew about Russia and Britain. He was a very broadly informed, human sort of man. But I never felt other than dominated by his vibrant personality, his sort of hypnotic masculinity, and one felt enveloped by his warmth and at the same time slightly repelled by his menace.
He had magnetism, absolute magnetism, and he could put anybody to ash by looking at him. And Hitler had the same thing, apparently, as far as his eyes. That man, he had something.
It's the only time in the whole of my life that I actually felt the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. In a way, he appeared to be rather like a very flamboyant black bookmaker, enormous great rings on his fingers, a very ornate stick, and very impressive eyes, rather sort of bored into. Coupled with the fact that you knew he was determined to ruin everything in your district if he could, had a terrible effect on one.
By the middle of 1952, hundreds of thousands of Africans, mostly Kikuyu, had taken the oath of unity. A more militant set of leaders had taken over most of the top offices in Kau. Mass meetings of unprecedented size took place at which the demands for self-government and for the return of expropriated lands were made with new confidence. The settlers felt threatened by this militancy, but they were more disturbed by the prospect of the British government coming to a political settlement with the Africans, as was happening already in West Africa. Self-government under permanent white leadership had always been the settlers' goal in Kenya. In order to realize that objective, they now embarked upon a campaign to crush African nationalism. At this point, it's very important to look at the chronology of the events which led up to the declaration of the emergency. Sir Philip Mitchell, Kenya's governor since 1944, retired in June 1952. Mitchell had been a thorn in the settlers' side. While they claimed that discontent was growing into revolt, Mitchell was saying that things had never been better. With Mitchell out of the way, and his successor not due to arrive for 3 months, the settlers made their move. On July 10th, Michael Blundell, the leader of the settlers, introduced a motion in the Legislative Council calling for stern measures against a subversive organization which he said was spreading like a disease through the colony. The acting authorities refused to accept this view or admit that new laws were necessary. Over the next few weeks, the settlers held a series of meetings. They threatened to take the law into their own hands unless the government declared a state of emergency, arrested the nationalist leaders, and issued a statement that nationalism on West African lines was not the official policy in Kenya.
Mr. Michael Blundell, leader of the European elected members, a body formed by the white settlers, strongly criticizes as ineffectual the present action being taken by the government. The feeling runs high among the settlers, for it is the ultimate aim of the Maumau to drive them all from Africa. Refused audience with the governor, Sir Evelyn Baring. The demonstrators attempt to storm Government House.
Well, I went along to Baring, and he said, you must go out and control the crowd. I will not go out. One day another crowd may demand my going out. When I arrived, the settlers were stabbing their cigarettes on the arms and faces of the police, the black policemen, to get them clear of the doors so they could smash the doors in. Well, I ordered the police away, and the policeman stood at attention and said, I only take my orders, sir, from the commissioner. And I remember turning round, because you must remember it's terribly intense. I said, where the bloody hell is the commissioner? He was just behind me. And I said, you take your men away. You take your men away. I'll be responsible. Just as we were getting the crowd settled down, the Sultana of Zanzibar, who was naturally a dark-featured woman, came out onto the veranda to look over the crowd. And of course they went mad. I remember one South African woman saying, there, look, they've got the bloody niggers already in the place. The bloody niggers are already in the place.
Now that the killing had been turned on them, the whites armed themselves.
A month or two before the emergency was actually declared, many of us felt something was going to happen. And we had rumors that perhaps Mr. Kenyatta would be arrested, together with the other members of the committee of the Kenyan African Union. What was going to happen, of course, we couldn't foresee at that time.
On the 19th of August, the acting governor denied categorically that there was a state of emergency in the colony. The government could not stop nationalism, he said. It could only try to guide it. Now the settlers began to talk of vigilante groups. They began to attribute every crime to Maumau. Every murder, every theft, every sullen look, every hostile stare was the work of Maumau.
The Maumau became a very real threat to the isolated white settlers. Nellie discovered that even Karanga, her cook, had Maumau connections. She was worried.
9th of October, 1952. On Tuesday, poor old Chief Waruhiu got murdered, and another European woman stabbed to death, making the second in a fortnight. So now I'm taking the firearm question seriously and going to the police to be told how to load my revolver.
White settlers struggled to preserve their pre-war way of life, in spite of the real situation in Kenya. But homegrown militia and armed settlers could not cope.
The fact that your own cook, who'd been with you for 30, 40 years, could be oathed in a way that he could come and kill you. Unbelievable. You'd been a friend to him, you'd been helpful to his children, you'd done this, that and the other over the years, and yet happily one night he would come and slit your throat. This they couldn't understand. They couldn't understand the depth of bitterness.
The Kenya government, more worried by the threat of a settler revolt than an African one, agreed to consider special laws to suppress African politics.
We were not taken by complete surprise, as we knew something was going to be done to try and keep down the movement, which was now have taken tremendous proportion in agitating for self-government.
On September the 16th, several Kenya officials flew to London to persuade the Colonial Office that the proposed laws were necessary to control subversion. This was the first time the British government was informed directly of what was going on. A week later, 7 new ordinances were passed and held ready for the arrival of the governor, whose signature would make them law. On September the 29th, more than 3 months after Mitchell's retirement, the new governor arrived. Sir Evelyn Baring was welcomed at Nairobi Airport by settlers and government officials alike. On September the 30th, Baring was sworn in as governor. On October the 3rd, he signed the new legislation. He was then taken for a brief tour of the rural areas where Maumau was allegedly operating. On October the 7th, while Baring was still on tour, the incident for which the settlers had waited took place. Senior Chief Waruhiu, one of the government's most loyal supporters, was assassinated.
Kenyatta had avoided taking sides. In 1952, the British persuaded him to do so. At a mass rally alongside the pro-British chief Waruhiu, he cursed Maumau.
I think he was cornered. They forced him to denounce Maumau, and I think he did not know what to do about it. So he used a Kikuyu proverb, which said that Maumau should go under the roots of the tree, Miriam Kongoe, and which actually means go into the drains and never to come back. So it was taken very seriously by people.
Kenyatta's curse led the Maumau Central Committee to summon him.
When he came, we told him how we are disappointed. In fact, that was the time when the Central Committee introduced itself to him, that we are the Maumau Central Committee, we are organizing this and that, and we feel very hurt by your denunciation.
Kenyatta was left in no doubt that if he continued to denounce Maumau, they would deal with him.
Kenyatta would have been a very big trouble.
Was there
even to the extent of being killed. It was not a joke by that time. There were no going back.
There was the possibility Kenyatta could have been killed?
Yes.
If he had tried to go back?
Yes.
And denounce Maumau? What makes you so sure of that?
Well, I know because I was the chief organizer and I know what was... people were serious about it. within the movement, they had their local people. If they decide somebody will die, then, and death sentence has been passed by the bench, well, nobody can stop them.
So there were the local district liquidation squads, were there?
Everywhere. They were everywhere. Because, see, there were a lot of traitors, and they had to be stopped.
In October 1952, Chief Waruhiu, who had stood beside Kenyatta when he cursed Maumau, was murdered. Bering had been governor for only a week. Across the grave, he saw Jomo Kenyatta. They did not meet. The whites forced the new governor's hand.